The Friday the 13th franchise is one of the most iconic horror series ever made. What started as a low budget whodunit slasher set at Camp Crystal Lake eventually turned into a franchise with teleporting killers, telekinetic battles, trips to Manhattan, and even Jason in space. That's right, folks. When you have nowhere else to go, go to space. So today I'm ranking every Friday the 13th movie, the 2017 video game, and a fan made anthology you'd be quite surprised to learn is actually available to watch on YouTube. So grab your hockey mask, watch your back at Camp Crystal Lake, and let's get into the ranking. So let's kick things off with the movie that started it all, Friday the 13th, released in 1980. Now, this first movie, it just feels so different from the rest of the series. It's slower, it's more suspenseful, it focuses more on mystery rather than constant action. And of course, the film delivers one of the most famous twist endings in horror movie history when it's revealed that the killer is Jason's mother, Pamela Voorhees. It also has the godfather of gore, Tom Savini, doing the makeup effects for the movie. So that's like a big thing. I fucking love Tom Savini. While I do find it to be a bit dated compared to later entries, and some scenes kind of tend to drag on a little bit to pad the runtime, if you know what I'm saying, there's really still no denying just how influential this movie was in launching the slasher boom of the 1980s. And without it, this iconic franchise just doesn't exist. So that's why I'm ranking it as Mother approved. All right, so next up we have Friday the 13th Part 2, which was released in 1981. We have final girl Alice getting killed in the first 10 minutes of this movie, and then we jump forward 5 years. This is when Jason truly becomes the main villain of this horror franchise. He doesn't have the hockey mask yet, but he is introduced as the sack headed killer who has apparently just been hanging out Beetlejuicing. Who knows what the fuck he's been doing at Camp Crystal Lake all this time. But, anyways, I truly believe that this one improves a lot upon the original. It's got faster pacing, the kills are more memorable, the characters are more likable, and the final chase sequence is genuinely tense. Friday the 13th Part 2 also has arguably one of the best final girls in the series, and that is Jenny Field. She's one of the few who actually outsmarts the killer rather than just surviving him. She's been studying child psychology, so that knowledge actually becomes pretty crucial after she figures out that the killer is Jason Voorhees. She understands how deeply he's attached to his mother, and when she stumbles upon his shack and his shrine that's dedicated to his dead mom, instead of just running, she picks up the sweater and pretends to be his mother to confuse and control him. One of the smartest survival tactics in the entire franchise. She survives because she thinks strategically, not because she's lucky. Now, this may not be the flashiest entry in the series, but it does include my favorite final girl of the series, and it's a very solid sequel that helped turn Jason into the horror icon that he is today. All right, so with that being said, I think I'm going to put Friday the 13th Part 2 in Mother Approved. If I had my choice between the first one and the second one, I'm definitely picking the second one because, again, better kills, more memorable characters, best final girl, in my opinion. But obviously, without the first one, we're not going to have the rest of the franchise. All right, so next up, let's take a look at Friday the 13th Part 3, which came out in 1982. And I just want to take a few moments to really appreciate this theme song. It's fucking awesome. It's like a disco funky beat. I don't even know how to describe it. If you haven't heard it, definitely pause this video, go watch it, come back. But it's so good, it deserves to be on everyone's Halloween music playlist. This movie is extremely important to the franchise because it's the first time that Jason dons his iconic hockey mask. Without this movie, Jason probably would not have become the horror icon that he is today. It was also filmed in 3D, which explains why there are so many scenes where objects are being thrown directly at the camera. And apparently, it was a very big bitch to even film this. They had to do a lot of takes every time just to get the 3D to work right with the camera. Now, this one follows a group of teenagers staying at Final Girl Chris's family cabin near Crystal Lake. We also have some bikers that show up after having had a run in earlier with nerdy jerk Shelly. Richard Brooker plays Jason in this one, and he is my personal favorite out of all of the other actors that have played Jason. I feel like he perfectly balanced physical intimidation, movement, and personality, and to a big extent, this portrayal defined how Jason would be played for the rest of the franchise. Now, while the characters aren't the most memorable, this movie does have that classic early 80s slasher atmosphere that I absolutely love. And of course, the introduction of the hockey mask alone makes this movie a huge milestone in horror history. So, with that being said, considering the fact that it's got that funky fucking opening beat that just kicks ass. We've got my favorite guy playing Jason. We have the introduction of the hockey mask. I am obviously going to put this shit in peak Voorhees because that's exactly where it belongs, in my humble opinion. All right, so next up we have Friday the 13th, the final chapter, which was released in 1984. This is considered to be the best of the franchise by most of the fans. And while I think there's a lot to love in this one, it's just not one of my favorites. But it does introduce us to series regular, or at least for the next three movies, he will be a series regular. That is Tommy Jarvis, and he is played by a young Corey Feldman. And while characters like Tommy Jarvis stand out, many of the other victims are just typical slasher archetypes without much depth, which is common, of course, in the franchise. But if the film is supposed to be the best, then you could argue it should have the best characters overall, which it kind of doesn't. Now, it executes the slasher formula well, but it doesn't really innovate or change the structure of the series. And the climax involving Tommy Jarvis defeating Jason Voorhees is memorable, especially with the whole fucking machete to the head sliding down on the machete. Oh, so good. But I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't really resolve Jason's story in a meaningful way. He's simply defeated again, just like all of the previous entries. So the final chapter is a very solid entry, and it's more of a perfected version of the formula rather than the most creative, influential, or unique film in the franchise. And that is why I am going to put the final chapter in Mother Approved. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. It's probably going to hurt a lot of people's feelings, but I'm just some rando on the internet. Who cares what I think, anyways? You can put it in peak Voorhees. All right, so next up we have Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning, which came out in 1985. And this is easily one of the most controversial movies in the entire franchise. It follows Tommy Jarvis years after his traumatic encounter with Jason, but the movie introduces a shocking twist involving the identity of the killer. This film reveals that the killer actually isn't Jason at all. It's really local paramedic Roy Burns. Who's Roy Burns? He's introduced at the beginning, and he decides to go on a killing rampage after his son Joey is found hacked to death by a fellow halfway house resident in the beginning of the movie. Now, when fans first saw this movie in theaters, that twist was extremely unpopular, and I can totally understand why. And this movie has also actually been kind of compared to Halloween 3 of the series because, again, we don't have Jason as the killer, it's Roy Burns, a paramedic. But of course, over the years, there have been more people that have started to appreciate the movie for how weird it is and chaotic and the real chances that it takes. It really kind of swings for the fences. And come to find out, there apparently was a lot of drug usage on the set, which is not surprising once you've watched this. Everybody's kind of acting crazy in the movie. And before this movie, the director was known for doing adult films. So I think he was more interested in the whole tits and ass than he was in directing. Over the years, more and more people have started to appreciate this movie for how weird and chaotic it is. Characters are loud and ridiculous, dialogue is sometimes unintentionally hilarious, and the movie almost feels like some sort of bizarre soap opera mixed with a slasher film. It also has one of the best serenading poop sequences I have ever seen in a movie, and I never thought I would say that phrase out loud, but yes, you just have to see it. Um, it's definitely messy, but it's also oddly entertaining to watch MST3K style. So that is why I am going to put Friday the 13th, the new or a new beginning, in them damn enchiladas. So next up we have Friday the 13th Part 6, and that is Jason Lives. Came out in 1986, and this one gets additional points for having the James Bond like opening credits. Fucking love it. Tommy Jarvis is back, and this time he's played by Tom Matthews, who brings a mix of charisma, charm, confidence, and hero energy that this character didn't have before. This time around, he feels like the true protagonist of the franchise, not just a traumatized survivor. This is the movie where the franchise fully embraces its own absurdity. It has a much more self aware tone, including jokes, meta references, and a sense that the filmmakers really understood how ridiculous the concept had become at this time. This is also when Jason officially becomes an undead monster after being resurrected during a lightning storm. Despite the humor, the movie still delivers plenty of great slasher moments and creative kills. Because of the balance between comedy and horror, I consider Jason Lives to be one of the most entertaining entries in the entire series. But I will say that the biggest gripe that I do have with it is the surprising lack of tits and ass. Like, where are they? Especially after part five. Part five was like directed by a dude that used to direct adult films. And you could clearly tell that there was a lot of blow and all sorts of drugs on set. So, of course, I am also going to put Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. I'm going to put that shit in peak Voorhees because I really love it. Tom Matthews is great. He's like funny. I love his whole relationship with the other final girl, the daughter of the sheriff. Oh God, I totally fucking forgot as well. One of the best things about this is that we actually have children at the camp again. I don't think we haven't even seen children at the camp, minus the original film where we're having the flashback. Like, that's the last time we've seen kids at the camp. All right, so next up we have Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, which came out in 1988. This is basically Carrie versus Jason. It's a fun concept, and this entry introduces Kane Hodder as Jason for the first time. His performance adds a lot of physical intensity to the character, and many fans consider him the best actor to ever play Jason. Unfortunately, the movie was heavily censored by the MPAA at the time, which means many of the kill scenes were cut down significantly. Because of that, some of the violence feels less impactful than it probably should have been. Still, the final showdown between Jason and telekinetic protagonist Tina is pretty memorable and makes this entry stand out from the others. I also love that Tina's ghost dad helps Tina defeat Jason by jumping out of the lake to grab him and drag him back down into the water. And in my opinion, this is the best that Jason has ever looked. I mean, the exposed spine, looks great. I love that he's waterlogged. I love when Tina crushes his head and causes his mask to just pop off, and you get to see that awful face and the gaping mouth. It's just, I love that effect. I love how he looks. Um, Also, a lot of the scenes are filmed very tension filled. I love the sequence where Tina has essentially pushed Jason through the bottom of the steps into the basement, and it's shot from underneath the steps. I love that. And so, because of all of those reasons, I am going to put Friday the 13th, A New Blood. Let's put it in. Oh, goodness. It's gonna go mother approved. Doesn't quite get peak Voorhees, but it's so close. I think that if there was a way that they could release the cut with the actual like kills that they had filmed, they've got those out there. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to look at them, but they're pretty fucking gnarly. If they actually had a way to cut in those additional gore scenes, this movie clearly would have been peak Voorhees. But because we got all those edits from the MPAA, unfortunately, it's just going to make it into mother approved. All right, so next up we have Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. This is one of the most famous examples of a movie with an amazing title and a very disappointed execution. The idea of Jason stalking victims through New York City sounds pretty fucking incredible, right? You could imagine him rampaging through subway tunnels, Times Square, or dark city alleyways. But the problem is that most of the movie doesn't even take place in Manhattan. Instead, a majority of the movie takes place on a boat full of teenagers traveling to New York. So by the time Jason finally reaches the city, the movie is almost over. That said, there are still a few memorable moments in this, like Jason punching a character's head clean off during a rooftop boxing match. And then Jason enters Times Square, breathing all dramatically, casually walking past a group of punks, kicking over their boombox, and then lifting his mask to show the punks that they don't want none is actually pretty funny. But overall, the movie never really delivers on its premise, which makes it feel like a huge disappointment. And the Jason design throughout the movie also isn't my favorite. He's always wet and slimy, and he's ultimately defeated by toxic waste that melts him and turns him into a scared little boy. So it's pretty lame. So that is why I am putting Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan to. I'm going to put that in Mother is Unimpressed because she is unimpressed. I'm sorry. All right, now we have Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, which came out in 1993. Do we want to take a guess as to whether or not this would actually be the final Friday? Because we all know it's not. One of the strangest things about this movie is that Jason barely even appears in it. Instead, the movie introduces some bizarre new concept where Jason's slug spirit can possess other people's bodies, which means most of the movie is spent watching random characters become the killer instead of Jason himself. And who really wants to do that? That's kind of lame. It's a strange direction for this series that honestly feels more like a supernatural possession movie than a Friday the 13th movie. It also tries to expand Jason's backstory with weird mythology about cursed bloodlines and magical daggers. And while I appreciate the attempt to do something different, most of it just feels confusing and unnecessary. I will say that I do love the Easter egg of the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead being included in the movie. Also, there are a few decent practical effects and a few brutal moments, but overall, this entry just feels more strange than satisfying, and I couldn't wait for the end credits to roll. And of course, the last time I watched this movie, other than just a few nights ago, was back in 1993. So I don't foresee myself watching this one again unless I'm doing a complete watch of the series. And even then, I may skip this one. So, with that being said, Jason Goes to Hell is going to be put right into the Crystal Lake outhouse. I'm t- I'm like really sorry, guys. I know that there are some lovers of this movie out there. I'm just not one of them. So you can like what you like. It's just, oh, I did not like it. I'm sorry. All right, so next up we have Jason X, which came out in 2001. Now, this one is often mocked as one of the strangest entries in the Friday the 13th series, but there are several reasons why I believe it's good and an important addition to the series. So instead of repeating the same formula, the film embraces the ridiculous premise and turns it into something unique. Putting Jason in space is basically the franchise fully leaning into its own insanity. Instead of pretending to be serious, the movie knows exactly how ridiculous the idea is and it has fun with it. That self awareness makes it charming and entertaining rather than embarrassing. It has some of the most creative kills, including the famous liquid nitrogen scene where Jason smashes a victim's frozen face. So good. And heck, don't forget that Jason is essentially awoken from his slumber by two people having sex. So I love that. So, because the movie takes place in a futuristic setting, it gets to have a lot of fun experimenting with different things like sci fi weapons, space environments, technology based kills. And of course, this keeps the violence fresh compared to the usual camp setting. It tries something different. Many sequels in the franchise stick closely to the Crystal Lake formula, and Jason X is one of the few that completely reinvents the setting. Instead of another group of teens at camp, the movie introduces a spaceship setting, futuristic soldiers, science fiction elements, and whether you love it or hate it, it's one of the most original entries in the series. In my opinion, it works as a horror comedy and clearly leans into dark humor, especially with scenes like the holographic campers recreating Crystal Lake. And of course, the sleeping bag death scene. Gotta love Kane Hodder just endlessly hitting them. Moments like that show the film understands the franchise's reputation and plays with audience expectations. I believe that Jason X succeeds because it stops pretending the franchise is grounded and instead turns Jason into a full blown pop culture monster who can exist in any setting, even space. Rather than being a failed sequel, it's more like a fun, self aware experiment that proves that Friday the 13th's formula can still entertain when it's willing to take risks, which I feel like this movie definitely takes some risks. And as you can tell, it's definitely one of my favorites in the franchise, and that is why I'm putting it in peak Voorhees. That's right, Jason X, peak Voorhees. I love it. So fun. All right, now we have Freddy vs. Jason, which came out in 2003. Now, for years, horror fans had dreamed about seeing Jason fight Freddy Krueger on the big screen. In fact, harkening back to part 7, The New Blood, that was actually supposed to be Freddy vs. Jason, but they couldn't get the rights then, and so they just ended up having him battle Tina the Psychic, telekinetic Carrie bitch. So, when this movie finally happened, it delivered exactly what fans wanted: a giant over the top battle between two horror legends. The movie leans heavily into spectacle, featuring multiple brutal fights between the two killers. It might not be the scariest movie in the franchise, but it's still entertaining and feels like a massive horror crossover event. So I feel like Freddy vs. Jason is pretty popular amongst most fans of the franchise, but I feel like it works a little bit better as a Nightmare on Elm Street movie than a Friday the 13th movie. So that does knock it down a little bit for me in terms of enjoyment and ranking it, at least with the other Friday the 13th movies. So, with that being said, I am going to put Freddy vs. Jason in them damn enchiladas. Like, there's a lot to like about this movie. I love the fact that we finally get to see them go toe to toe. But one of the things I don't really like is the early 2000s aesthetic that it has. Everything just looks too clean. I guess another thing is it's not on film. I'm assuming that it's digital. Maybe it is on film, but it doesn't look like it. It looks way too clean. I love the usage of the colors with the filming, but it just again, it's too perfect looking. It looks more like a fucking soap opera or, As the World Turns or like even more of a modern Netflix movie. All right, so last but certainly not least, we have Friday the 13th, 2009. And this is the reboot. This movie surprised a lot of people, myself included, because it ended up being much better than many fans expected. Like, I thought it was just going to be hot garbage. I feel like it was unfairly judged by a lot of people when it came out because it was more towards the tail end of all of the classic slashers getting reboots at that time. Want to say that it was kicked off by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which, funnily enough, this movie is actually directed by the same director. So I don't know why everybody liked the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but this movie was poo pooed all over when it first came out. So instead of retelling the original story, the film combines elements from several of the first original stories, and it creates a faster, more intense version of Jason. This version of Jason feels much more like a hunter. He runs, he sets traps, and stalks his victims with a level of intelligence we rarely see in the earlier films, which is kind of a breath of fresh air, to be honest with you. The movie also wastes very little time getting into the action, which helps keep the pacing very strong. Now, while the characters are still typical horror movie stereotypes, the movie delivers plenty of brutal kills and one of the most intimidating versions of Jason in the entire franchise. And I do know there was a lot of I think maybe a lot of fanboys may have also been upset that it wasn't Kane Hodder, but listen, I love Kane Hodder. He's definitely one of my favorites, but I loved Derek Mears' portrayal of the character. I thought he did just great. It's very scary, very intimidating. I love the whole hunter aspect. It just works for me. And so, with that being said, I'm definitely going to put that shit in peak Voorhees because they understood the assignment. They went back to basics. They changed things up just a little bit, just enough, combine those first few movies. So I really feel like they streamlined this. Absolutely love this movie. That's why I'm putting it in peak Voorhees. All right, now we have some added bonuses here. This is not a movie, but I want to talk about Friday the 13th, the game, which came out in 2017. This captures the feeling, atmosphere, and chaos of the Friday the 13th better than almost any other horror game. Instead of just adapting the movies loosely, it lets players experience what it's like to survive as a camp counselor or be Jason Voorhees. The developers packed the game with details straight from the films. Players can explore locations inspired by Friday the 13th parts 1 through 6. The cabins, campgrounds, and forest feel like you are walking through the movies. You can have up to 8 players. One player does become Jason, while the remaining players control camp counselors. So, players playing as camp counselors have to either survive for 20 minutes by evading Jason, or they can do little mini games on the map, like, let's say, getting a car to start or getting a boat and escaping. You can even call the police. Once you call the police, it takes about 2 minutes for them to arrive, and then they'll arrive. It's always random, it's either on the left or the rightmost part of the map. And so that's always fun when you've called the cops, you're hiding from Jason, and then you hear those sirens. You look at the map and you're like, oh fuck, now I gotta book it over to the opposite end because I'm on the opposite end where I need to be. And then, of course, if you play as Jason, you get different abilities like teleportation, you get to detect frightened counselors, and smash through doors and walls. It creates this great power fantasy where you feel like the unstoppable slasher villain. The asymmetrical multiplayer often leads to unpredictable moments like players panicking and deciding to split up. We have last minute escapes in a car or a boat, betrayals or heroic sacrifices because real people are controlling the characters, and every match tells a different horror story. The attention to the franchise lore is incredible. The game includes multiple versions of Jason based on the films, where each of them has unique strengths and weaknesses, reflecting how Jason appeared in those specific movies. For fans, it's basically a playable museum of the franchise. The game captures the exact tone of the films. The sudden musical stings when Jason appears, when the music starts and Jason is nearby, it creates real panic, just like in the movies. I can tell you, every time I hear that musical sting, I panic. I'm like, oh fuck, where do I go now? Where can I hide? And I always pray that I have found a pocket knife at that time, because at least a pocket knife will help you essentially get out of jail for free if he decides to grab you. You can get away from them really quick. But the kills are creative and brutal. The game features tons of unique finishing moves that feel straight out of the films. Friday the 13th game succeeds because it doesn't just copy the movies, it lets players live them. And that is why I am putting that in peak Voorhees. I love this game. Everybody should play it. Yes, go play it now. All right, so the last thing that I want to talk about is Never Hike Alone, the Ghost Cut, and that came out in 2023. This is a Friday the 13th fan film that includes, it's actually an anthology. It includes Disappear, Never Hike Alone in the Snow, Never Hike Alone, and Never Hike Alone 2. And that is cut into one cohesive anthology timeline. It's considered by many to be one of the best fan made additions to the Friday the 13th universe because it combines multiple projects into a single cohesive story while capturing the tone and spirit of the original films. Instead of feeling like a collection of random shorts, it plays like a full movie that expands the mythos surrounding Jason Voorhees. The series picks up after the events of Jason Takes Manhattan, with much of the story taking place in 2017. The production quality is shockingly high. Many fan films feel cheap, but the Ghost Cut looks closer to a professional indie horror film. This fan project looks and feels cinematic, not like a YouTube short. It connects to the official canon. One of the coolest elements is the return of Tommy Jarvis, played by none other than Tom Matthews from Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives, reprising his role. That connection makes the project feel less like fan fiction and more like a continuation of the franchise's legacy. It's made by fans who truly understand the franchise. The filmmakers clearly understand what makes Friday the 13th work. Instead of reinventing the formula, they refine it and celebrate it, rather than just repeating the typical group of teens gets killed setup. The anthology builds on the legend of Jason haunting the woods around Camp Crystal Lake instead. This makes the story feel bigger, like Jason has become a local myth that people keep running into with deadly consequences. It feels like a true love letter to the series rather than just a tribute. All right, so with that being said, I am going to put Never Hike Alone, the Ghost Cut. I'm going to put that in Mother Approved because I really like this, and it's essentially a love letter to the fans. And that's my ranking of the entire Friday the 13th franchise. This franchise may be messy, ridiculous, and sometimes completely insane, but that's also part of its charm and what makes it so much fun. Jason Voorhees has become one of the most recognizable horror villains of all time, and these movies helped define the slasher genre for generations of horror fans. All right, so now I want to hear from you. What are some of your favorite Friday the 13th movies in the series? Comment below and let me know. I know some people are going to completely disagree with my tier ranking list, and that's fine. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and stick around for more horror related content.